NATO's mulling counter moves to challenge what the head of the alliance called Russia's reluctance to, quote, consider us a partner, end quote. In an interview to the European press, Anders Fogh Rasmussen outlined NATO's latest plans for Eastern Europe. Now, that includes ensuring permanent international armed deployments on Russian doorsteps. NATO already has a so-called response force, but Rasmussen believes it now needs to be spearheaded. He also spoke of closer ties with Ukraine. The alliance is to decide the amount of aid it will send over to Kiev, which is currently involved in a bloody crackdown on opposition forces on its own territory. Let's get more analysis on this on the interview from James Corbett, who's the editor of the Corbett Report, an independent Japan-based news outlet. James, good to see you again. So how much of a game changer is all this for Europe?
Well, sadly, the fact that NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen and the NATO powers generally have been exposed as liars over their repeated promises in recent years that there would not be the establishment of a permanent military base in Eastern Europe, it comes as no surprise to anyone who understands that this is just part of a string of broken promises that NATO has strewn behind them for the past 2.5 decades, going back at least to the point in 1990 where, according to both former Soviet President Mikhail Gorbachev and former U.S. Ambassador to Russia Jack Matlock, as well as declassified documents of meetings between the former German foreign minister and Soviet foreign minister, that there was a clear commitment made at that time in 1990 during the German reunification process that NATO would not expand eastward into Europe. In fact, the quote was not a thumb's width further to the east. And of course, that has been broken time and time again over the past 2.5 decades, to the point where we're now actually at the point where NATO is situating missile defense shield sites in Poland and in Romania, deploying guided missile destroyers to Rota, Spain over the next 2 years as part of the NATO missile shield, and of course culminating with Obama's announcement in June that $1 billion would be put towards a European security fund specifically to help Poland and other Eastern European NATO allies. This is just another part of that bigger picture that shows that NATO is not committed to peace and stability in the region. They are looking to be the dominant military power.
James, so much information that you've just given us, but I just want to touch on what Rasmussen has just said. He said he kept avoiding the term permanent base, but when asked if there would be permanent NATO international deployments, he said yes. So what does that mean?
Well, it means whatever they want it to mean at this point. I think this is still the mealy-mouthed diplomatic language that is used so that whatever eventuates from this, they get to say that it was part of the plan all along. I think we have to read this as a commitment towards the establishment of permanent military bases, specifically because that has been on the table now for a number of years and has been actively denied. So I think the fact that they are not coming out and saying this, and they are not specifying where these bases will be situated, is just part of the diplomatic dance that's taking place right now. But we have to understand that there is a permanent military deployment that is being considered right now that is absolutely a mark of brinksmanship that is bringing the world closer to global war and confrontation.
How far will NATO go in supporting Ukraine?
Well, that really depends on how far that they feel that they can go, and unfortunately, I don't think that there's any boundary to that. Obviously, Ukraine has been involved in a diplomatic effort with NATO to become a member since, at the very least, since the 2008 application to the NATO Membership Action Plan, and unfortunately, that process is taking place still continuing to take place in the midst of this Ukrainian crisis, which is itself an incredible mark of provocation and clearly, again, a sign of a commitment not to peace or stability or to the easing of tensions, but to the increasing of those tensions. And unfortunately, Poland also holds the card of being able to invoke Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, the founding document of NATO, which allows any member that feels itself to be under attack to call on the collective self-defense of NATO as a whole, which of course would allow NATO to really react and interact with Ukraine in any way that they feel would be justified in that scenario. So that's, again, I think the single greatest threat to peace on the planet at this moment.
Why is Russia then say no longer willing to be a partner, as NATO puts it? I mean, that's the way they see it.
This is, of course, intended to be a slight against, for example, Russia withdrawing from the talks, the negotiations that have been going on with NATO over the missile shield that NATO's been deploying, ostensibly to counter Iran, but it's being situated in Poland and Romania, clearly intended to be targeting Russia. So I think Russia is now understanding that NATO is acting in bad faith, that they are not going to fulfill their obligations, commitments, or promises, as is again being displayed today. And as a part of that, NATO is now calling Russia names in an effort to try to discredit them in this process and to point fingers away from what they are doing themselves.
James Corbett, as always, giving us a lot to chew on. The editor of the Corbett Report, live here on RT. Thank you.